Chapter 32. The kingdom's main army advanced slowly across the littered battlefield. The crushing attacks by the cavalry on three sides had given them a decisive victory in the space of a few short minutes. In the second line to the command party, Horus rode beside Sir Rodney. The battlemaster had selected Horus as his shield man, riding on his left side in recognition of his service to the kingdom. It was a rare honor for someone in his first battle, but Sir Rodney thought that the boy had more than deserved it. Horus viewed the battlefield with mixed emotions. On the one hand, he was vaguely disappointed that, so far, he had not been called upon to play a part. On the other, he felt a profound sense of relief. The reality of battle was far removed from the glamorous dreams he had entertained as a boy. He had pictured a battle like this as a series of carefully coordinated, almost choreographed actions involving skillful warriors performing brave acts of chivalry. Needless to say, in those dreams, the most prominent and chivalrous warrior on the field had been Horus himself. Instead, he had watched in horror as the stabbing, hacking, shoving brawl of blood and dust and screams that had developed before him. Men and wargals and horses had all died, and their bodies sprawled now in the dust of the plains of Uthal like so many scattered rag dolls. It had been fast and violent and confused. But now, as they rode forward, details began to emerge, and he was horrified as he saw the red surcoats of battle-school apprentices among the dead. He saw one body, limp and lifeless as a stretcher-bearer's, turned it over, and beneath the blood and dirt that smeared the pale face, he recognized Paul, a Year 4 apprentice who had been an assistant sword drill instructor. Over the past month, as Horus's natural skill with the sword had become evident, he and the older boy had become casual friends. When Horus was hurriedly packing his kit for the trip to Celtica, Paul had come to the barracks to lend him a warm cloak and a pair of strong boots. Now he was dead, and the debt would never be repaid. Horus felt a sense of emptiness and loss. He glanced now at Sir Rodney. The battlemaster's grim face told him that it was always this way. Horus's throat was dry as he tried to ease it by swallowing. He felt a sudden stab of doubt. He wondered, if he were called upon to fight, whether he could simply freeze in fear. For the first time in his life it had been driven home to him that people actually died in battles, and this time he could be one of those people. He tried to swallow again. This attempt was no more successful than the last. Morgoth and his remaining soldiers were in a defensive formation at the base of the cliffs. The soft, marshy ground held the cavalry back, and there was no option but to take the infantry forward and finish the job in bloody hand-to-hand fighting. Any normal enemy commander would have seen the inevitable result by now and surrendered to spare the lives of his remaining troops. But this was Morgoth, and they knew there would be no negotiating. They steeled themselves for the ugly task ahead of them. It would be a bloody and senseless fight, but there was no alternative. Once and for all, Morgoth's power must be broken. "Nevertheless," said Duncan grimly, as his front rank stopped a bare 100 meters from the Wargals' defensive half-circle, "we'll give him the chance to surrender." He drew breath, about to order his trumpeter to sound the signal for a parlay, when there was movement at the front rank of the Wargal army. "Sir," said Gillen suddenly, "they have a flag of truce." The kingdom's leaders looked in surprise as the white flag was unfurled, carried by a Wargal foot soldier. He stepped forward into the clear ground. From deep within the Wargal ranks came a horn signal, 5 ascending notes, the universal signal that requested a parlay. King Duncan made a small gesture of surprise, hesitated, then signaled to his own trumpeter. "I suppose we'd better hear what he has to say," he said. "Give the reply." The trumpeter moistened his lips and blew the acceptance in reply, a descending sequence of 4 notes. "It will be some kind of trick," said Halt grimly. When the cavalry had swept through the Aurelian army to attack the Wargals, he had resumed his place at the command center. Now he frowned at the enemy's latest move. "Morgoth will send a herald to talk while he's making his escape. His voice trailed off as the Wargal ranks parted once more and a figure rode forward. Immensely tall and thin, clad in black armor and a beaked black helmet, it was, unmistakably, Morgoth himself. Halt's right hand went instinctively to the quiver slung at his back, and within a second a heavy armor-piercing arrow was laid on his bowstring. King Duncan saw the movement. "Halt," he said sharply. "I've agreed to a truce. You'll not cause me to break my word, even to Morgoth." The trumpet signal was a pledge of safety, and Halt reluctantly returned the arrow to his quiver. Duncan made quick eye contact with Baron Errold, signaling him to keep a close eye on the ranger. Halt shrugged. If he chose to put an arrow in Morgoth's heart, neither Baron Errold nor anyone else would be quick enough to stop him. Slowly, the vulturine figure on the white horse paced forward, his wargle standard-bearer before him. A low murmur rose among the kingdom's army as men saw, for the first time, the man who for the past 15 years had been a constant threat to their lives and well-being. Morgoth stopped a mere 30 meters from their front rank. He could see the royal party where they had moved forward to greet him. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the small figure hunched in a grey cloak on a shaggy pony. "Duncan," he called, his thin voice carrying through the sudden silence, "I claim my rights." "You have no rights, Morgoth," the king replied. "You're a rebel and a traitor and a murderer. Surrender now and your men will be spared. That's the only right I will grant you." "I claim the right of trial by single combat," Morgoth shouted back, ignoring the king's words. Then he continued contemptuously, "Or are you too cowardly to accept a challenge, Duncan? Will you let thousands more of your men die while you ride behind them? Or will you let fate decide the issue here?" For a moment Duncan was caught off guard. Morgoth waited, smiling quietly to himself. He could guess at the thoughts running through the minds of the king and his advisers. He had offered them a course of action that might spare the lives of thousands of their soldiers. Errold moved his horse alongside the king's and said angrily, "He has no right to claim a knight's privileges. He deserves hanging, nothing more." Some of the others muttered agreement. "And yet," said Halt quietly, and they all turned to look at him. "This could solve the problem facing us. The Wargals are mind-bound to Morgoth's will. Now that we can't use the cavalry, they'll continue to fight as long as he wills them to, and they'll kill thousands of our men in the process. But if Morgoth were killed in single combat—" Tyler interrupted, finishing the thought. "The Wargals would be without direction. Chances are they would simply stop fighting." Duncan frowned uncertainly. "We don't know that," he began. Sir David of Caraway interrupted. "Surely, sir, it's worth a try. Morgoth has outsmarted himself here, I think. He knows we can't resist the chance to end this on a single combat. He's thrown the dice today and lost, but he obviously plans to challenge you, to kill you as a final act of revenge." "What's your point?" Duncan asked. "As Royal Battlemaster, I can respond to any challenge made to you, my lord." There was a brief murmur at this. Morgoth might be a dangerous opponent, but Sir David was the foremost tournament knight of the kingdom. Like his son, he had trained with the fabled swordmaster MacNeil, and his skill in single combat was legendary. He continued eagerly, "Morgoth is using the rules of knighthood to gain a chance to kill you, sir. Obviously he's overlooked the fact that, as king, you could be represented by a champion. Give him the right to challenge, and then let me accept." Duncan considered the idea. He looked to his advisers and saw grudging agreement. Abruptly, he made up his mind. "All right," he said finally. "I'll accept his right to challenge, but nobody does anything in acceptance. Only me. Is that clear?" The council nodded agreement. Duncan stood in his stirrups and called to the ominous black figure. "Morgoth," Duncan called, "although we believe you have forfeited any rights you may have had as a knight, go ahead and make your challenge. As you say, let fate decide the issue." Now Morgoth allowed a smile to creep over his entire face, no longer trying to conceal it from those who watched him. He felt a quick surge of triumph in his chest, then a cold wash of hatred swept over him as he looked directly at the small, insignificant-looking figure behind the king. "Then, as is my right before God," he said carefully, making sure he used the exact ancient words of the challenge, "and before all here present, I do so make my challenge to prove my cause right and just to—" He couldn't help hesitating and savoring the moment for a second. "Halt, the Ranger." There was a stunned silence. Then, as Halt urged Abelard forward to accept the challenge, Duncan's penetrating cry of "No!" stopped him. His eyes glittered fiercely. "I'll take my chance, my lord," he said grimly. but Duncan threw out an arm to stop him from moving forward. "Holt is not a knight. You cannot challenge him," he called urgently. Morgoth shrugged. "Actually, Duncan, I can challenge anyone, and anyone can challenge me. As a knight, I don't have to accept any challenge unless it is issued by another knight, but I can choose to do so, and I choose whom I challenge." "Holt is forbidden to accept," Duncan said angrily. Morgoth laughed thinly. "Still slinking and hiding, then, Holt?" he sneered. "Like all rangers. Did I mention that we have one of your ranger brats as a prisoner? So small we nearly threw him back. But I've decided to keep him for torture instead. That will make one less sneaking, hiding spy in the future." Holt felt the blood draining from his face. There was only one person Morgoth could be talking about. There was an ominous calm to his voice as he spoke. "Turn him loose now, Morgoth, and I'll let you die quickly. Otherwise—" He left the rest of the threat unspoken, but Morgoth saw the pale face and recognized the barely restrained anger in his old enemy. Obviously, the ranger brat meant something special to Holt. Then instinctively he recognized the truth. The boy was Holt's own apprentice. "You really should have taken better care of your whelp, Holt," he said casually. "After I've finished with you, I'll see to him, personally." Holt felt a red surge of rage, of hatred, for the vulture-like figure before him. Hands reached out to stop him, but he shoved his horse forward, facing Morgoth. "Then, let's get to it, Morgoth," he said. "Holt, I command you to stop," Duncan shouted, drowning him out. But then all eyes were drawn to a sudden movement from the second rank of the army. A mounted figure burst clear, covering the short distance to Morgoth in a heartbeat. The Lord of Rain and Night reached for his sword, then realized the newcomer's own weapon was sheathed. Instead, his right arm drew back, and he hurled his gauntlet into Morgoth's thin face. "Morgoth," he yelled, his young voice cracking, "I challenge you to single combat." Then, wheeling his horse a few paces away, Horus waited for Morgoth's reply.